Today, we're taking a wild, honestly kind of mind-bending journey into the future, specifically the year 2045. We are going to be unpacking an incredibly dense, provocative, speculative thesis by Benoit Nounier-Lapierre. It's essentially a blueprint for post-state frameworks. We're looking at a future where geopolitics, information systems, and human biology don't just intersect, they completely merge. It's a heavy topic, for sure, but we're going to navigate it together.
So I want you to just pause and ponder this for a second. What if your country started on the internet and your passport was literally your biology? Just think about that. We are so hardwired to the idea that a country is a patch of dirt you're born on, right? And a passport is just a little paper booklet in your pocket. Well, the source material asks us to completely throw that notion out the window. What if a nation was a cloud-first entity and your citizenship was physically integrated into your body?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our flight map for today. First, the 2045 network state. Second, sovereignty without borders. Third, biology as infrastructure. Fourth, redefining human evolution. And finally, the right to opacity.
All right, part 1, the 2045 network state, inverting the Westphalian paradigm.
Now, according to the author, our traditional geography-based nations, the ones anchored to a contiguous piece of land and a centralized legal system, they're basically reaching structural exhaustion. They just aren't built for a highly decentralized informational world. Notice the core inversion here. Historically, nation-building meant conquering or drawing borders around physical territory first, which then eventually generated a collective people. The network state model flips this entirely. It starts with the people. A highly aligned digital population comes together online first, they build a collective identity and capital, and only after that do they actually acquire territory.
Let's walk through the actual mechanics of how that happens. Step 1, it begins as a high-density digital enclave. By pooling financial and computational capital online, these communities gain real, undeniable geopolitical leverage. Moving to step 2, they use that leverage to crowdfund or lease physical nodes. Think autonomous economic corridors or charter zones carved right out of legacy nations. And finally, step 3, they negotiate diplomatic recognition. But here's the kicker. That recognition isn't based on how long they've held a piece of land, it's based on their economic integration and legal interoperability.
Moving on to Section 2, Sovereignty Without Borders, a volumetric territory.
If a state is no longer boxed in by a continuous line on a flat map, what does its physical footprint actually look like? Well, the network state's territory is distributed through a vertical stack rather than spread across a flat surface. We're talking about an archipelago of linked smart hub cities on land, deep ocean habitats, floating logistical platforms, and extending all the way up to lunar research settlements and orbital stations. Sovereignty becomes topological. It's not about exclusively possessing a surface anymore. It's about negotiated control over the flow between these diverse hubs, all sharing a common treasury.
So how in the world does a citizen navigate this sprawling, scattered state? The traditional passport is entirely replaced by a layered credential architecture. At the top, you've got the juridical layer handling your diplomatic nationality. Below that is a quantum-resistant security layer. Then, and this is crucial, a bodily layer with revocable biometric attestations. Finally, a social layer for context-specific proofs. This brilliantly acts like a kind of diplomatic API. It proves exactly what is needed, like say if you're old enough or healthy enough for a specific transaction, without ever exposing your entire identity to the system.
Which brings us to Section 3, Biology as Infrastructure, the citizen as a protocol.
This is where the thesis zooms all the way in from macrogeography right down to microbiology. By 2045, the state isn't just a place you live in, it's practically embedded in your biological substrate. The author uses this specific term, tech fascia. It's dense academic jargon, I know, but think of it as a dynamic civic exoskeleton. Just like biological fascia connects your muscles, tech fascia is the connective tissue binding your body, the city, and the institution together. It uses subdermal metamaterials and a continuous quantum biometric skin, meaning your metabolic data replaces static idea documents entirely.
And it goes even deeper than your skin. The thesis envisions vascular nanorobotic swarms, an algorithmic biological equilibrium. We are literally talking about microscopic agents operating inside your bloodstream, working alongside quantum biological processors. They're continuously auditing your molecular data, managing your immune responses, so human health shifts from, random reactive diagnosis to a predictive algorithmic feedback loop. You aren't just trusting your body's natural baseline anymore, you're living in an algorithmically governed biological equilibrium.
Section 4. Redefining human evolution, ectogenesis, and metahumans.
All of this biological control leads to a major shift towards some highly speculative evolutionary frameworks. The anchor here is a concept called morphological freedom. The source defines this as the absolute legal and biological right to alter, enhance, or completely redefine your own physical structure. Biology basically transitions from being fixed evolutionary hardware into a dynamic programmable node within the state's grid. It is the ultimate expression of bodily autonomy, just supercharged by futuristic tech.
This morphological freedom even extends to how human life actually begins, through something called ectogenesis. By 2045, the source suggests reproductive protocols could shift from natural gestation to artificial, quantum-monitored womb arrays. This would allow for real-time epigenomic adjustments and targeted cognitive baseline calibration. Now, the author is very quick to emphasize strict governance here. A legitimate network state has to strictly prohibit this tech from turning into coercive demographic manufacturing. Children cannot be minted as optimized products.
Because instead of forced optimization, the real goal is what the author terms xenophile metadiversity. Advanced biotechnologies shouldn't force humanity to converge on one single optimized norm of beauty or intelligence. Actually, it should multiply the legitimate forms of embodiment. The polity has to protect totally different architectures of personhood, whether you're inhabiting a standard biological body, teleoperating a robotic frame across the ocean, or relying heavily on an AI cognitive prosthesis.
All right, our final stop, Section 5, the right to opacity, constitutionalizing the unoptimized.
Now we have to wade into the deep ethical warnings associated with all this biological integration. I really want you to absorb this stark quote directly from the source. Frictionlessness can become the aesthetic disguise of domination. Wow. A society that can seamlessly read your skin temperature and your blood chemistry might promise incredible, frictionless preventative medicine, right? But it also risks building the most intimate surveillance apparatus in human history. Sometimes friction is actually necessary. Sometimes it's the only constitutional space where your consent actually means anything.
To prevent the human body from simply becoming property of the state, the author insists on some very specific anti-coercive doctrines. Your bioinformation must remain under your revocable control. There has to be a strict, undeniable firewall between medicine and policing. And vitally, there can be absolutely no economic or political exclusion for remaining biologically ordinary. If you choose not to be enhanced, if you remain culturally traditional, you cannot be penalized or pushed out of society.
Bringing this whole narrative full circle, we arrive at the actual title of the piece, Specular Sovereignty. The state has to become a mirror machine. Specular implies its sovereignty doesn't just watch its population from above like a panopticon. A legitimate state must reflect that data back to the citizen. It relies on the absolute requirement that you, the citizen, can inspect, contest, or completely withdraw from the algorithms that are modeling your life.
So I'll wrap up this explainer today with one final lingering question straight from the author's thesis. Can civilization constitutionalize the right to remain partially unknown, unoptimized, untracked, and unconverted into infrastructure? The mature network state of 2045 won't just be about erasing human limitations. It'll be about preventing technological systems from monopolizing what it actually means to be human. It's an incredibly delicate balance between progress and autonomy. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.